Nancy Pelosi was subject to something she's not used to, which was an actually tough interview. And there was a number of extraordinary moments, but one in particular where she's both exposed as completely ignorant and her attempted support for the Biden policy just crumbles in real time. Let's take a listen to how this went down.
We have I don't want to call him Mr. because I've lost so much respect for him, Netanyahu there, who seems to be...
You've lost respect for him?
Long time ago. But nonetheless, he seems to be calling the shots, and he and his very extreme right wing, I wouldn't even say conservative, because that's a legitimate place to be in the world of thinking on the spectrum, but right wing, radical right wing cabinet.
But there are levers that Biden could use, which he hasn't used. There are levers which previous presidents have used when Israel has, in their view, crossed the line.
For example?
Go back to 1956. Eisenhower threatened sanctions if Israel didn't pull its forces out of Sinai. Reagan, held up delivery of fighter jets over Israel's action in Lebanon. George Bush Sr. blocked loan guarantees because of settlement building.
He did. I was there the day that well, you're going back to 56. I mean,
so these levers are there, aren't they?
Well, there's some, but the president has said something about the settlements. He has said something about the settlements.
But saying and blocking weapons supplies, for instance, are very different things, aren't they?
Well, it's not. It's a path. It's a path.
It's a path. It's a path. So
the Reagan example was great.
And she apparently, I guess, wasn't aware. She seemed to know about the Bush one.
Lady, you were alive at that time. I'm pretty sure you were in Congress, so you know.
And then this week, the president has said something about the settlement. Oh, wow, he said something about the settlements? What a brave warrior, really standing up for human rights here. And then when she's pressed on, she's like, it's a path. It's like, well, yeah, I guess it is a path, isn't it? But, it's so rare that American politicians actually get pushed on any of this. And they're so locked into this mindset that, oh, well, Israel can just do whatever they want. We really have no power over them, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that is exposed right there, then and there, in real time. And she also, Saagar, echoes the same language about the problem is just this extremist government. That's the real issue, trying to confine it to a few bad apples, so to speak, versus, the entirety of the project and the illegal occupation and the settlements and the, assault on Palestinians, the collective punishment, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of those where for a while, there was a sizable, I wouldn't say anti-settlement, but people who did not agree with the policy. It doesn't appear that they have any real power in Israeli society right now. A lot of that is downstream of demographic. A lot of it is downstream of how people feel about Hamas, with the war. But there's no use in pretending that a society that exists doesn't exist. We can't project our own neuroses and desires onto another country. I see this with American Indians all the time. They're they don't like Modi or a lot of the BJP, and it's like, yeah, well, India does, and you don't live there anymore, so deal with it. It's one of those where you can't conjure up a fake country in your head. You just have to deal with what's actually in front of you. You also flagged this, Krystal, about the ICJ. Let's put it up there on the screen. They're currently filing their report to the ICJ by trying to protest the ruling that plausible acts of genocide were occurring. And I think it fits very much with this, where they both have their U.S. politicians who are defending them, but at the baseline level, they are preparing and are worried about the continued pushback from the community of nations, even if there is no genuine enforcement mechanism, per se. It just, basically, imagine it's like South Africa. If you find yourself basically, at the crux of a global, genuine BDS movement, then post October 7th, let's say 2-3 years from now, that's going to have some serious ramifications for your economy. I actually just saw a piece of news that flashed this morning about how Secretary Janet Yellen just sent a letter to Bibi expressing concern about the situation of the Israeli economy and directly tying it to the West Bank and to continued settlement, saying that you have a real problem here. So if our Treasury Secretary is getting involved, it's bad.
Yeah, no, that's right. So this report was mandated by the ICJ in their initial ruling, saying that Israel is plausibly committing genocide, and they said you have a month to file a report about how you're complying with these injunctions. They stopped short of overtly calling for a ceasefire, but they called on them to cease the actions that basically, led them to that conclusion that you're plausibly committing genocide. There was a lot of focus on allowing in humanitarian aid, a lot of focus on accountability for those who are overtly inciting genocide. Now, that's problematic for the Israelis, since some of the comments cited in South Africa's filing go all the way up to the president and the prime minister and numerous security cabinet members, numerous Likud party members, et cetera. So this report that Israel filed, which unfortunately is actually private, it's not made public, but reportedly they said it would be brief and that they were expected to assert, this is per Haaretz, that it is permitting humanitarian aid, including food, medical equipment, to enter Gaza in an organized manner, is permitting civilians to leave areas in which there is fighting in accordance with international law. The report is also expected to state that Israel investigates suspected war crimes and cases of incitement advocating harming civilians in Gaza. To your point, Saagar, about how Israel does appear to be concerned about what happens at the ICJ, even as it doesn't, as everyone always say, have an enforcement mechanism. Our Supreme Court also doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. It's all about the way that the institutions and bodies that are involved, whether they respect the decisions or not. But they do seem to be concerned. They put out that memo, remember, from a top leader of the IDF, basically being like, don't do any war crimes, guys, and definitely don't record yourself doing any war crimes. That was seen as basically, a sort of like last-minute attempt to cram for the exam of showing that they're serious about war crimes and human rights, et cetera. But let me show you the reality, which won't be any surprise to any of you who have been watching this show, because we've been covering the fact that they've been allowing these protesters to block aid from coming into the Gaza Strip. So the idea that they've been, really expediting in aid and that's been a top priority for them in compliance with what they're required to by the ICJ is obviously preposterous, not to mention the fact that we now have confirmed reports of babies and others actually dying from starvation. But Human Rights Watch had the specific numbers to rebut what Israel is claiming here in their ICJ response. We can put this up on the screen. They say Israel is not complying with the World Court order in the genocide case, failing to ensure basic services and aid. Here's the bottom line. Fewer trucks have entered Gaza and fewer aid missions have been permitted to reach northern Gaza in the weeks since the ruling than in the weeks preceding it, according to the UN. So data published by OCHA and the UN Relief Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East say that the daily average number of trucks entering Gaza with food, aid, medicine, et cetera, dropped by more than a third in the weeks following the ICJ ruling. You had 93 trucks per day post ICJ ruling versus 147 trucks per day. And you only had 57 trucks per day in the most recent time period between February 9th and February 21st. So we're actually going backwards. We're going in the wrong direction in terms of humanitarian aid to a population that is now literally starving to death. And some portion of that certainly has to do with these protests that are being allowed, which are blocking the trucks. Another part of why this is occurring is because you've had now documented reports, including by CNN, that Israeli forces have struck a food convoy that was back on February 5th. You've also had relief organizations saying that they can no longer operate because of their fear that they will be attacked, in spite of the fact that they're coordinating with the IDF, with Israeli authorities. They're giving them their coordinates to avoid being attacked, standard deconfliction channels. That has been no guarantee whatsoever. So that's the other portion, is that these aid convoys have no ability to move, especially to northern Gaza, and remain safe. And you have very limited amounts coming into the Strip in the first place. So, it's preposterous to imagine that Israel has actually fulfilled their obligations that the ICJ ruled back a month ago.
Yeah, no, it's the protests that they've allowed have been absolutely insane, especially considering their response that we covered yesterday to the protests that are against Bibi.
Yeah.
They just don't treat them equally. It's like, well, then you're basically allowing it to happen. And, people have eyes, unfortunately for them. We all have, there's video in Google Translate, and I honestly think if this had happened in the 90s, we'd be living in a totally different situation. imagine no phones, no footage. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of what 2006 was like. 2006 was a brutal war. We didn't really learn that much. Most of it was totally controlled by the media apparatus. But in the current system, the stuff doesn't work anymore.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.